Chapter 1. From Gold to Shit. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. Came from Lao Tzu. You can't outgive the universe. From 2002 to the middle of 2008, everything I touched turned to gold. Property, business, on and offline, health, life in general, you name it. Whatever I touched turned to gold. I had been in business for a long time before then. However, a life-changing moment set in place a sequence of events that led me to discover exactly how to create certain wealth. I didn't know that was the direction I'd taken, though I look back now and can clearly see it was. I had learnt exactly how to make the magic happen for myself, exactly how to create abundant wealth, and within 5 years I had learnt, then uncovered a way to how to actually teach this magic to others. It was 1980, when I was 13 years old, that I first heard about how things actually worked, when my millionaire great-uncle Dave told me that one day I would be a success and become a multi-millionaire. He told me I was going to have a fantastic life and I would help a lot of people to do the same. Most importantly, he said I was going to have great fun doing it. He didn't spend a lot of time with me, as I was far too interested in playing with the air rifle he'd given me, but while we were on holiday for a few weeks at his home in the New Forest, I spoke with him a few times. He told me that I had most of the skills I'd required to become rich, and that any skills I needed I would be able to find simply by asking for them. That, as if by magic, the people I needed would just come into my life. He said not to worry, I'd recognise them when they did, as they would have a sign on their heads. Indeed they did, and they still do. Well, quite a lot happened between 1980 and 2001, but it was in November 2001 when the big turning point of my journey happened. We were at lunch when my business mentor turned to me and said, "Look, Andy, all your ideas are great, they just lack money." Something switched in me and I just went, "Oh, I'd better go and make us some money then." Now, up until that point, I had virtually forgotten what my Uncle David said to me. It had come back to me in my late teens, because I lost my way in my teenage years, as most teenagers do. It showed up occasionally over the years, and then it came back to me later that evening. I suddenly realised that I had not achieved the goal that my uncle had set for me, which was to become a multi-millionaire. I had forgotten to do it. So I went away and figured out how to make money, did months of research, and then announced what I was going to do to make my fortune in February 2002, when everyone, except my wife, laughed at me. I came home from telling everybody at our board meeting, in which they had all told me I was wrong, and if it was that easy, that everyone would be doing it. Alison asked me what I was going to do now. I said, "I don't know." "What do you think I should do?" She said, "You're right, they're wrong. Take everything we've got and do it." My life turned again at that point and I got started. I didn't become a millionaire overnight. It took a little longer, but in approximately 7 months I was a multi-millionaire. The decision I made to just go and create money led me to discover exactly how to create riches in property. However, it actually taught me how to create success. Property was merely the vehicle I chose to do it with. But property and making money were not really what I loved to do. Yes, they were great fun, and I had fun getting them off the ground. But when they were off the ground, I got bored with them and wanted another challenge. As my business mentor Mike said, I should be sealed in a box marked "open only" if you need to get a business off the ground. He says I'm the best he's ever seen at that, and praise from him counts. It wasn't until late last year that I finally figured out what I love to do, and what I wouldn't ever get bored of doing. So in 2002 I had learnt the skill of success. However, it wasn't for another 3 years that I would really see where there was a problem in the success industry. The problem being that most people can't create success. They can't find the right path to get on. I discovered after I was already rich that there were actually self-help books that taught people how to make money. That's right, I'd never read any of them. I created millions all by myself. This was through total ignorance and the education system beating me up with boring books. Up until that point, I had probably only read 5 to 10 books in my entire life. When I discovered personal development books, I just couldn't stop reading. However, when I studied them, I thought, wow, this is great. With these books, anyone can get rich. I then, of course, noticed that despite these books being everywhere, and despite lots of people telling me how good these books were, that people simply weren't getting rich. There were millions and millions of books, but not millions and millions of millionaires. There were a few, but they were the ones who would have made themselves rich anyway. There didn't seem to be any difference between people who studied personal development and those that didn't getting rich. Sure, the people seemed happier, but they weren't any richer. So this puzzled me. Eventually I realised that the way books shared their wisdom wasn't getting through to the vast majority of their readers. Now my dad was a teacher, and I'd always thought of that as a poor choice of profession, as simply you weren't paid enough. However, my dad taught me different ways of learning as he helped me with my homework. He explained that there were always ways to teach it, and a lot of people's minds work differently. You just need to teach in ways that the majority can understand, and then the majority will help the minority get it as well. He didn't say it, but I assumed that it was just daft to teach the cleverest children and hope the rest would get it. In 2005, I attended a seminar and heard that just 1% of people retired rich. In other words, people worked their entire life, struggled throughout, rushed around, continuously emailing and phoning, and the financial basis of their lives resulted in a 99% failure rate. Now, I got incensed by this statistic. It really did anger me at the time, as how could we have bought into a system that had that failure rate? How could we be living our lives just hoping it would work out tomorrow, next week, next month, next year? This statistic wouldn't leave my mind. And then I thought about all the people who were reading personal development books. Surely this statistic must change. Then I looked around. Virtually everywhere I looked, it seemed that there was this 99-to-1 ratio. But why? After all, I had made riches, and I knew how easy it was to create. So I resolved then to find a way to share what I'd learned, to be able to explain what I'd worked out how to do, to put it into a language that produced far greater results than any other personal development book had ever done. I resolved to change that statistic for anyone who manifested my teaching into their life. I left this idea to sit for a while. Then in 2006 I attended a seminar in which the speaker said, "You are not an expert until you write a book." By this time I had finally figured out that I was actually an expert in property, even though I never intended to be. So I decided to write a book about how to do it. As I wrote the book, I put in place a lot of different bits that changed the way the information was being explained. Money for Nothing and Your Property for Free was the right book at the right time, so it was an instant success. The book went on to become the UK's best ever selling book on property investment. And all this happened while we were still just doing our market testing. The book taught stuff in a different way. The results were fantastic. The actual feedback showed an average of £50,000 profit per book reader, and 12.5% of my readers had responded. This was 1,250% better than any other book on personal development. At least I have not heard of another which has achieved anywhere near this. But it didn't stop there. There were a vast number who never emailed me, but still come up to me today and tell me that my book changed their lives. And there was also a number of mistakes I made in actually getting people to read it once they bought it, which I intend to have solved with this book. But in the main, my little experiment had worked. I had found a method, a style of teaching if you like, which created results for the masses, not for the minority. After that, I got swept away by the fact that I was this property mastermind. I didn't get into property because I loved it, I got into property for the money. I mean, I did love it for a while, but in truth, I love getting things off the ground, which others find hard to do. I love simplifying things and showing people my system. I love making things work which other people can't, and getting to share in the pure joy of watching and hearing about them making it happen. Basically, I get real pleasure knowing that I've helped them. My goal is always to make people £1,000 for every £1 they spend with me, as I know and abide by the law of reciprocation. Basically, I know I can't outgive the universe. However, I intend to give it a good go. A very brief history of me. I trained as an apprentice cabinet maker. As I was good with woodwork, my mum knew I was going to go into business later in life, so she wanted me to have a trade to fall back on when I screwed up, which she obviously knew was inevitable. Right from the start, I was always taught to never enter a room without knowing where the exits were. People often say, don't have a plan B. Well, I've always got ready B, C, D, E, F, G, H without any effort. They are merely alternate routes to follow if this route doesn't work out so well. I know there is an abundance of other options. I finished my training and then moved on to another company for 5 times the money I was on. When I got there, I quickly became hated as I systemised that job. In the end, I was making 5 times as much as any other worker. How did I do it? Simple. I installed a system and applied it. Once I was fed up of being hated there, I went and learnt to install home improvements. I studied that whilst working for 18 different companies in 3 years, and when I was sacked from the last company, I was earning 3 times as much as the next best bidder. By this time, I had all the skills I needed to work for myself, so at the ripe old age of 23, I thought I was a businessman and went to work for myself. Boy, was I in for a shock. I spent 11 years figuring out how to get rich whilst building a business with well over 100 full-time employees and another 30 to 50 subcontractors and part-time staff. I liquidated a business or two along the way in the School of Hard Knocks. Finally, I got fed up with everybody telling me that 2% net profit was really good for this industry. I thought they were mad. Either that or I was. So I got fed up trying and getting nowhere to become rich in that painful industry. Don't get me wrong, I love the whole journey. It was just that I went into business to make a financial success, and that business wasn't ticking that box. So instead, I figured out how to make millions from property and sold out of the old business. When we decided we wanted to sell, then as if by magic, within 2 weeks, a major competitor asked us if we were interested in selling. We of course said, well, not really, but you may be able to twist our arm. So we sold out of that business and we became full-time property investors. I had a truly fantastic time for 7 years. I owned stacks of stuff, including loads of Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and had many unbelievable experiences. Worked on various niche product launches, doing multi-million pound launches, always selling out in seconds, not hours. I became fascinated with learning marketing. I became fascinated about health and nutrition after losing over 140 pounds. I'm also married to my lifelong partner Alison. We've been together since 1988 and we have 2 wonderful children, David and Sarah. We live very happily in West Sussex in the UK. Life was going great and I'd developed multiple businesses all around the property niche. Then the credit crunch literally stopped play and I was back to square one, bankrupt. I realised I had lost control of my mind, so I went on a very, very enlightening journey. I fully regained control and my ability to create with just thought. Then decided to apply my knowledge to training others how to create by design and stop living unfulfilled lives. How I ended up bankrupt, basically how I screwed it up. The story of how I ended up going bankrupt is as important as the story of how I was a success, as I used exactly the same system to destroy my life as I used to build it. The problem is I used it unknowingly. Therefore I created my life by accident and not by design. This also shows the thought process, which led up to how I made my mental connections and joined up the dots so that I was able to switch back on my success engine, which up until I'd screwed it up, had been going really well. I'd experienced massive success. I was now experiencing massive failure, and I knew I would experience massive success again. However, right then, I was doing something wrong, and I knew I had to fix it. So first I had to find out where I was doing it wrong. I entered 2008 and I was on fire. One of my businesses had just been valued at over £17 million. I was in the process of releasing millions in equity, and I had a new home study course coming out in the next few months. We were approaching our target of profit from just book sales before we went to the mass market. I was healthy, fit, keen, loving it all. I was just putting into place the start of a monster business plan which shortly saw us generating millions in sales online in just a few seconds. This model was set to change the game for foreign property ownership and at the same time generate increasing tourism numbers for our chosen country of Cyprus. We had tested the system and it looked wonderful. However, right at the point of starting this new venture, the world of finance was changing. The very foundation on which I built all these businesses on was just about to turn to sand. In July, I really was on top of the world. Everything looked like it was all going to my plan, which was to produce a business model which returned significantly better returns for property investors and a vastly improved holiday for tourists, as well, of course, as an absolute fortune for myself and my business partners. Well, we were all standing on the edge of a business that could easily have been modelled and sold around the world. I believed it was going to be worth hundreds of millions. All I had to do was direct us the right way and then get out of the way and employ some very clever people to turn the raw business into a real business. Also, that month, we had just managed to attain the holy grail in marketing and were making a profit just on selling books without our vast back-end sales funnel. We were about to launch to the mass market and really vamp up our sales. At this time, my other business had experienced a 50% drop in sales volume because of the credit crunch, but I knew with us going to the mass market with book sales that we would have 5 to 10 times as many prospective clients, and this was only a temporary setback. Though things went downhill sharply in August, by September 2008 we knew something was really wrong. Earlier in the year, when Bear Stearns went under, I thought we were on the verge of a meltdown, and now Lehman Brothers going was awful news. I watched as the world seemed to be oblivious to the abyss that we were standing next to. I remember thinking, well, the game's changed now. However, the people guiding us in Cyprus were still convinced that it would all be okay and the banks would return to lending soon. Actually, they didn't change that view until May 2009. However, I wasn't convinced. I saw the people who pull the strings make wrong turn after wrong turn and thought this is going to get worse, not better. But there was no turning back then. We were committed to making it work and so carried on. So in October 2008, I saw for the first time how all that I had created could be wiped out by the credit crunch in a matter of months. I had left my cash flow exposed, as I was in the process of releasing millions from my equity when the banks pulled the plug on the mortgages in March 2008. The 50% sale of our business passive investments, which was looking like raising us approximately 8 million, fell through, and so this was another big shock. Things went from bad to worse, sales in all businesses imploded, and nothing new was happening. Property was no longer flavour of the month, and I was fully exposed with all my focus on a niche which the world now hated. It was mid-October 2008 when I think I first accepted that the fact that this could actually fail. This is where I'm pretty sure I let lack in, though I have not yet tracked it back to the precise instant. However, I will find it one day. What technically killed my financial position off was a personal creditor who for whatever reason had decided in October 2009 that he thought he would stand more chance of getting his money if my estate went into the hands of a trustee, rather than having to accept that I just could not afford to pay now. I think he had been given some pretty poor advice. As to me, the logical action was to wait and see. I had been a massive income producer before, so to me it seemed only logical that I would produce massive income again. Though at the time I could not say how, as I was going to have to create this again from the ground up. I didn't know how, I just knew I would. Going back a little way, in early June 2009 I realised that I could no longer maintain my position, and now I was going to financially live or die by the good grace of my creditors. There were about 80 personal creditors, from memory, who could make me bankrupt with various loans ranging from $15,000 to $500,000. All of them carried a personal guarantee, so I was completely exposed. I had no problem with exposing myself when I took the loans out, because as I wrote in my first book, the only way this system could ever fail is if all the banks stopped lending money, a black swan event, and unfortunately those sort of events happen from time to time. I wasn't concerned about my institutional creditors, as I knew they would play the long game, so my other concerns were the taxman and my personal creditors. If I was going to survive this, I would fight one battle at a time. I considered making myself personally bankrupt, but considered that was to be just a cop-out. So instead, I would get everybody's support and make money again. Don't get me wrong, I know it would have been far easier to go down the bankruptcy route from the beginning. So, with making myself personally bankrupt off the table and nearly all my creditors being okay with a wait-and-see policy, I turned my attention to solving the problem. The current business plan was officially declared in the toilet, so I had to come up with a new plan. I looked into multiple different businesses, all of which I believed I could make work. I picked one, it failed. I picked another, it failed. I picked another, it failed. I had a process for finding quick results and knowing whether or not a business would work, so we put in a week or so of work, go and test the market and see what results came back. However, the results all came back as a failure. Every one. Everything I tried to do failed. There wasn't even a glimmer of success in any of them. Things I had done in the past and succeeded at just failed fast. From everything I touched turning to gold, now everything I touched turned to shit. Now I'm a very together person, and this was doing my head in. I would have long conversations with Alison about it. I just didn't get it. How could all these things, which had worked so well before, not be working now? Everything was not working where once everything was working. What had changed? What was I doing wrong? In August, all bar two of my creditors had said, "We'll wait for you to sort it out." Don't get me wrong, they weren't happy about it, but they knew that either I would create money again, or eventually my property would, or at any time they could always push the bankruptcy button. However, there were two who just didn't want to know. They thought they would have more chance of getting my money if a trustee collected my assets. They thought I had buried a big pile of money somewhere and the trustee would find it. I explained that they would be far better off waiting and seeing what happened, as they could always push the bankruptcy button later. In the meantime, they wouldn't be crystallising their and everyone else's losses. Well, their minds were almost in as much trouble as mine was. Obviously there was no pile of money, and this was subsequently proved, but they believed there was. So one of them pushed the button and I was made bankrupt on 21st of December 2009. Now this creditor also knew that between my business partner and myself, we owed around 5 million to other personal creditors. So if they had received good advice, then it was clear that there would have been an almost certain crystallisation of 80% minimum loss for everyone. And that was the best case scenario. As they subsequently found out, 20% recovery is not going to happen. This sort of thing is why the banks don't like to make you bankrupt. They will play the long game and they will wait and see what happens. The long game isn't a nice game to play, but the odds are a lot better of you winning. Anyway, patience was lost and I was made bankrupt, which of course was the very best place I could have ended up given the current situation. I was set free. About 8 weeks before I was made bankrupt, it all became very public and the intensity of the situation was put into the public eye. However, by that time, I was back in control of my mind. During October, I had fully regained control. So when it was all kicking off and I was the devil with two heads, I was able to just observe everything. Despite my financial world crashing down around me, the hurtful accusations being said about me online, the obvious anger from all financially concerned and others in general, I was at total peace and contentment, and this is simply because I controlled the illusions of fear and worry. This whole experience has forced me to look at my every thought, and I have learned and relearned so much about myself. Many people lost money, but I lost the most money. So I was the biggest financial loser, yet I was also by far the biggest financial winner. This whole experience I saw as the most wondrous gift, and I was grateful for it. Why? Because I had no debts and a perfectly functioning, streamlined, improved success engine sitting between my ears. What's more, I now knew exactly where the line was. I knew just how fast I could take corners in the future. So I had fixed my mind completely, and I was now just considering the exact ways I would use it again. I once again had full control of the power. I could use the law of attraction on purpose. Of course, I'd been using it all the time. I was just using it to create the wrong thing. I was obviously not using it to create growth, but to create loss. The universe makes no bones about this. We use the law for good or bad. It's our choice. I was no longer rich, but wealth is something that can never be taken away. It has to be let go of. Wealth is something you are, and I knew I would always be wealthy. I knew I would always make riches again. To me, this was just a temporary setback, an opportunity to begin more intelligently, as Henry Ford would say. And just in case I forget to mention it, I won't be doing the going bankrupt thing again, as I've had a go at this experience, and it is only something I needed to do once. I do think, though, with hindsight, that I actually needed to go bankrupt for numerous reasons, one of them being my own curiosity and relish in building up the blocks again. I loved that game as a child. The fun wasn't looking at the blocks constructed, the fun was building up the blocks. In 2003 I said to Alison, we've made it now, but wouldn't it be fun to have it all fall down and I'd get to make it all over again? She said to me, don't you dare do that. She knew what I was like, and she knew that's how my mind worked. I think subconsciously I probably desired this. I know subconsciously I created it. When I knew it was all going to come crashing down, I went through the worst case scenario with Alison. Apart from saying to me that I did it on purpose, she also said to me, I don't care if we lose it all. You made it once, you'll make it again. If we have to live in government housing, then it would only be for a short while where you made us our first money again. Fall richer, fall poorer. We were poorer now for sure, as in 2009 I had to ask her to sell her Ferrari to ensure we had money. That was a fun conversation to have. I explained it was only temporary and that one of the first things I would buy her after we got through this would be another Ferrari. So I went bankrupt, and just before going bankrupt, having all this public humiliation and personal threats made against me, whilst all this was going on, I was perfectly still and serene. I'd never felt such absolute peace and calmness as I did at that point. I was observing everyone else and their stress, fears, anxiety, worry, and yet none of it had any effect on me. It was not that I didn't care, it was just of no interest to me. It held no benefit for me, so why would I choose to allow it in? The journey of how I got calm, how I regained control of my mind and removed all the invisible objects started a few weeks before everything went public.